AI is now capable of cloning people's voices. For example, using AI, I can easily reproduce George Clooney's voice, Donald Trump's voice, or Scarlett Johansson's voice. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? In this week's podcast, I interview Charles Elwood, who has used AI to give back voices to people who have lost their voices due to disease. I spoke with Charles to help me get a better understanding of the dangers and opportunities of voice cloning.
It's like what happens when you can sound like whoever you want to be and just, right now just take their voice and there's no rules around this. What happens?
Don't forget to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Viewer interest is what enables me to keep making these weekly OpenAI podcasts. We have a number of exciting episodes coming up that cover topics such as AI and consciousness and the AI alignment problem.
This is the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast with your host, Stephen Walther, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have Charles Elwood with us today. And thank you, Charles, for joining us. And let me start with a quick introduction for Charles. Charles is a Microsoft AI MVP, an innovative technology expert, passionate about using cutting-edge AI solutions to improve lives and empower individuals with disabilities. Charles has demonstrated the transformative power of technology in enabling communication and preserving endangered languages. As a sought-after speaker and thought leader, speaking at conferences such as TEDx, Charles continues to inspire and motivate others to explore the future of technology and human connection. Once again, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's I could go for on forever, but I think we're limited to 30 minutes. Is that correct?
We might go over a little bit for you, Charles,
Okay.
but just for you,
All right.
So let me dive right in. So I actually stole this first question from you. I saw you ask it at on one of the videos that you had on YouTube. And so I want to start, you're a Microsoft AI MVP. I know you've been very close to AI from early days. The development over seems like forever now, but over the past like 2 or 3 years. And so I'm curious that if you could wave a magic wand and improve the world through the use of AI, what would you do? Any power in the world. I'm giving it to you for 5 minutes right now.
This is great. Usually I ask others, and I usually just tell people. But thanks for asking. So, and it's great because with AI, we're explorers in a way. And, I stumbled upon neural voice and the ability to give somebody, that's going into throat cancer surgery, or maybe ALS is coming on, the ability to bank and preserve their voice so that if they lose their voice, I can give that back to them and they can communicate with a part of their identity that gets taken away, right? So that was profound for me when I started experimenting with that. And, it's very scary in a way. You have thoughts of what if I fail? And then I have to tell this family that I can't go through with preserving their identity. So thoughts like that come through. So I had to push through a lot of fears, but I'm so proud to have pushed through all that, because now I get to live my dream of preserving people's voices and identities, so that they can have it back when it gets taken away.
Give us a story there. I'd love to hear that story end to end.
Yeah.
I know you had a TEDx video on it recently. I think it's a really inspiring story for the use of AI. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. And there's been multiple individuals that have, I've banked their voice now, but the latest one, I guess this is the latest story, is Microsoft sent me a name of an individual who lives in Montreal, and he was going into surgery. I believe it was thyroid, and he was told, you have a high chance probability of you're going to lose your voice. So he came to me and he said, can I bank? Can I preserve my voice? And at first we banked his English voice, and he read 50 sentences, but he read it very carefully, very slow, enunciated. And when we created his voice model, this was before his surgery, he said, "This doesn't sound anything like me. I don't speak like this."
Right.
He's like, "Can we fix this?" So we created another model. And then he asked me something a couple days before his surgery. He's like, "Charles, I need your help because I'm here in Quebec and I speak Canadian French. Can we preserve that language too?" And I was like, I've never even thought of that. So let's try it, and we did. And, the model actually didn't have Canadian French. It had French. So we tried it and he said, he responded like, "This is perfect. Thank you." And and we did it, right? It was probably the first time we did a bilingual voice banking. And this was just last week. But to go through that with somebody, and to help bank them, and you could tell, there was a sense of hope and a peace, before he went into surgery that I could provide to him. So that's been one very, very interesting discovery is, that's what some people are looking for. People look for different things. But one is, the fear of losing your voice after a surgery like this. But to be able to preserve that is amazing. And the amazing thing is it was 2 days ago, he came out of surgery, last week. And 2 days ago, he emailed me. He's like, "Charles, I finally feel better to email you. And my voice is coming back. It's hoarse right now, but we're going to get it back 100%. So, even better, like I provided him peace of mind going into the surgery. He could come out, use his voice, either of his voices, but he is able to recover his voice.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good news. So the idea, so I know you've helped a number of people who've lost their voice due to illness and surgery get their voice back. And the way they get their voice back is, I know you're using some Microsoft technology to
That's
do
right.
that. And so once do they basically like type sentences back out when they want to communicate? And does that become like a standard way for them to communicate, like with their family members? Or is it more like, is it for special occasions? Or I don't know. How does that, once they have that option of using the AI voice, how is it used in their lives?
That's a fascinating question that we've been, each individual works through, and we built an app on top of. So we use CNV Lite or CNV Pro if they don't have samples of their voice or they can't read the sentences. We have to then upload recordings. And there was one individual who was born without a voice. So for that one, we took samples of her mother's voice to give it to her. But your question, once they have the voice, we built an app on top of the Azure resource where they type in the text, it hits the API, responds with a WAV file, plays it back. But very early on, we discovered, in our conversations, normal conversations, it's bang, 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 people interrupt, you change your thought patterns. But one individual, Chris Martin, told me, he's like, I go to my coffee group and everybody's talking and I wave and I start typing and nobody waits for me. Right. And he feels, ignored again. He's didn't have a voice for a couple of years. So he actually doesn't use it in public. And I had a conversation with him at a restaurant and there was too much noise around and nobody could hear him through the speakers of the laptop as he was typing. So he says this is hard to use in the public and when people don't know how to wait for the interaction. So he and his wife told me they use it for conversations at home. And he prefers it when he has to dig deep into a topic. He wants his voice back because he was a former radio DJ. This was his livelihood. And she said he used to do a lot of play-by-play, and he has a very good sense of humor. And she said he likes to use his, and this is funny too, because the voice that we gave him, it's very, monotone. It doesn't have a lot of his inflections. So it's almost dry humor in a way. It adds to the humor because he types in something and it's a dry, but you can tell knowing him, that's a joke, but it's very dry. So yeah, that's a fascinating question because the people that have their voice preserved have to relearn how to communicate it with the world. Oh, and the other thing is some of these, you can fine tune these models now. So the text front end, before it feeds the model, you can kind of build your own language, type shorthand, for example, and then it maps it to the sound that comes back. So you can almost bypass the lengthy words with shorthand to communicate.
That's very cool. So I have to ask, I'm curious. I know that OpenAI is planning on coming out with their advanced audio mode sometime in the fall. I think they're advertising now, and one of the things they've been advertising about that is the ability to have sub-second responses and to be able to have it more conversational. As these technologies progress, I know this is based on the Azure voice stuff, but do you think that we'll get to the point soon where, I mean, people can have sort of more natural language in public? Or I guess it's always going to be delayed by the typing, or I don't know. I mean, is this something that people will need to learn how to interact in the right way with people who've lost their voice? Or do you think the technology will get to the point where people could interact in a way more typical of their friends?
I believe it will get to that point where even though they don't have a voice, and right now it's mapped to typing words.
Yeah.
And language is social construct, which is
Sure.
kind of interesting. We all agree this long word means this one idea, right?
Right.
So I think that'll all get remapped because you can reinvent language. Like for one girl, Maria, who uses sign language, I think you may have seen that in the one video. I was remapping hand signals, and I learned very quickly from what they taught me. That group in Puerto Rico is sign language actually involves eyes, and facial expressions, and maybe shoulder and all kinds of visual cues. So what we can do with AI now is the sound can be one thing, but the input can be, gestures from
Yep.
eyes, from mouth, from hands, and you can do combinations of those, or letters, and you can map all these inputs to outputs. So I think that will speed up in the future input. That instead of typing, you just gesture and move your eyes, and the
That's very
output will come
cool.
out.
And I would
Yeah.
assume that would do a better job of picking up on emotions and things like that and conveying it within the language, potentially.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what I was trying to do. I did some
Yeah.
experiments. So I do sign language, and then I
Yeah,
wanted,
yeah.
the like, hey, I'm really
Right,
excited,
right.
or I'm angry. So I was
Right.
trying to map words with eyebrow
Oh, that's
movement
cool.
to
Okay.
the sound, the
Right,
expression.
right. That's very cool. Well, one of the things that I've appreciated about your talks is I've noticed that you're fascinated by the topic of identity and how language
Hmm.
contributes to your identity. I was curious, what drove that interest? What got you interested in those identity questions?
Interestingly, you and I have both lived in Indonesia. When I was younger, my dad worked for an oil company, so we were oil brats, my sister and I, and we moved to the Netherlands, Indonesia, on the island of Borneo. And I'm going to show my Dayak
Oh, that's so cool.
that we
Yeah,
talked
just to
about.
clarify for the audience, because I think this is maybe inside knowledge between you, me, and the rest of Borneo, but the
Yeah,
Dayak is it's a group that lives mainly. They come from central Borneo, and I lived with a Dayak family when I was in high school, when I was 17. And it sounds like you also were around Dayak
yep.
people, but they're a very distinctive group within Borneo.
Yeah, and so back to the identity part,
Yeah,
and we can bring up the Dayak language too.
yeah,
But then I went to the Netherlands, and then Louisiana, which is kind of its own country within the U.S. They speak Cajun French there too.
right,
So,
right.
but reinventing myself every 4 years, right? So I was fascinated with the idea that you could reinvent yourself, and then also be a chameleon in a way. A lot of us, the army, the brats that moved around a lot, we had to reinvent ourselves, and we could, which is kind of cool. And after you've done that for a while, you start to mimic hand gestures, you mimic facial expressions. There's head motion that you
Yeah,
do, language. So when I learned that, I was like, a lot of these social construct language, all these body motions are social constructs, and when you can reinvent yourself, I was absolutely fascinated that I could do that.
that's very cool. Do you think that? I mean, I think it's interesting how. I mean, I think I've had that experience too. When you're speaking a different language, you start like gesturing in different ways, and different languages have different sort of rhythms to them and different ways that people interact
Yeah.
and interrupt one another. Do you think that there's actually your personality actually changes depending on the language that you're using?
Absolutely. There's a few bilingual people that know me, and when I was in Thailand, a lot of social structure in a lot of Southeast Asian cultures, and I was younger, so I was very deferential, humble, quiet. Adults, older people, they get the room, they get to
Yeah.
talk, and I had to wait. And so I never, I guess, had that rite of passage where I moved up in the world in the hierarchy. So when I speak Thai, I still speak what I'm used to, which is a very deferential, quieter Thai. But when I speak English, I'm the boisterous, loud American. So, and my hand gestures get
Right.
bigger too.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. I have two identities based on which culture, which social construct I'm speaking in at the time.
That's very cool. And one of the things I guess I'm interested in, because, you know, there's been a lot of demonstrations that have shown using generative AI to make translation between languages automatic and easy. And that's usually presented as a way to bring the world together, to enable people from different cultures to easily communicate with one another. But I've also worried, I mean, is this also a way of perhaps also collapsing differences between culture or losing some of that, richness that you get between different cultures? And I'm curious what you think about that, because it's like, I'm not quite sure what to think about it, because I love the idea of being able to communicate with anyone in the world, even if I don't speak their language. But on the other hand, I feel like I might be missing a lot if I'm doing it through this, through artificial intelligence.
Um, that's a great question. I think that comes from what you saw too with like Pine Ridge, Lakota.
Mm.
2,000 speakers left. Some of the words are sacred, can only be spoken by certain people. And I've had conversations with people on the reservation about, what do we do? Can we preserve it, or who decides on this preserving this language or not? Um, and you see it right now. It's happening. English is the dominant language just because these large language models are built on everything on the web, which is primarily in English. So when you ask it in English, have an English conversation with it, it does very well. When you go for a very obsolete language like Lakota or maybe Burmese, in Thailand, they know that Burmese is not well understood. You see it with the computer languages, Python, right? Everybody was kind of surprised, like, oh, this thing speaks Python too.
Yeah.
But, like what happens? This is interesting. Somebody asked the other day, what about Python is English words? So what about it in Japan or in Thailand where English is not the primary language? Does that push out people access to these tools? And what happens? Do more people learn English and then the other languages slowly die? But on the flip side, there's fine tuning, which, and what I did with the hand gestures, reinventing languages for somebody like Maria. So, I'm on a mission right now. I'm working with a university in Sierra Leone, actually, and, trying to help the Lakota tribe is educating them on what fine tuning means. And it can preserve languages and keep them for future generations. But, like, there's a lot of fear around this. Like, what is this thing, and do I allow it to build the mathematical models to understand my language or not? So the more we educate, the more we experiment, the more we show people what can be done to preserve languages, I think that'll help. But I think that answers right.
Yeah, I do. I'm curious though about what's the fear coming from? What's that? I mean, is it? I guess I'm trying to. I mean, sounds like danger of your language disappearing from Earth, which I would think, it's an important part of my identity. I'd want to do what I could to preserve my culture. Is it? What is the worry? What are they worried about?
So it was interesting. I've heard from, let's say that for the example, the university in Sierra Leone, African countries, for a long time, somebody else came, colonized,
Hmm.
and said, dictated, these are the rules, these are the social constructs. So now you have, people coming in say, hey, you should preserve your language with AI. What does that mean? Who are these people, and what is AI, and what is it going to do? Is it going to do the same thing that happened in the past in history? Similar things to Native Americans on reservations,
So
land
this
mistake,
is maybe
yeah,
like the fear of like pharmaceutical companies coming in and stealing, I don't know. It's like it's a worry about it's a worry about giving up something that's culturally theirs because they might be giving up something that they can't get back again. And without
right.
understanding the motives, that makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And yeah, it makes sense to be, yeah, like Lakota, if you
Right.
preserve it in and then your question in one of the other questions is who owns this?
Right.
It's in this mathematical model sitting on a server
Yeah.
somewhere. We don't know where. I was like,
Right.
is ownership, did I just give up ownership of my language and it sits on a computer? What does that mean?
Right. Well, I guess in
So
a way that's not so much different from like, the New York Times is of course suing Microsoft and OpenAI right now over scraping all the New York Times article. I guess that's not the Lakota fear isn't so different from the New York Times fear of,
yeah,
technically a model doesn't store like words, they store, weightings, and it can get to the degree where it can tell you a specific word, but it's really not, copying stuff. And what does that mean? That gets complicated fast. But I guess that makes sense. I mean, you're giving up something, your intellectual property in some way to a large corporation, and that's always something you want to be cautious about.
yeah, absolutely. I think you're right on in that. It's who do I give it to? What does ownership mean in this new future? Like you said, it's weightings, it's probability.
Yeah.
Is like, is that really my voice? It's this
Right.
probability model that's sitting on a machine. Is
Yeah.
that really my voice? Do I own that, or did the people that spent millions on R&D, that built that model that mimicked my voice, do they own that model? And I go back and forth. I was like, this is a
Right.
hard one to figure out.
Well, okay, I can't help myself. I have to ask you about the Scarlett Johansson controversy because
Hmm.
it feels like it's something very much related to voice and sort of ownership of voice. Just for some background, I'm sure everyone knows about this controversy, but OpenAI came out with their voice named Sky. They have some evidence. They've claimed that no, Sky was created independently of Scarlett Johansson, but the voices are similar. And there was a controversy about it, and OpenAI decided to pause Sky, so you can't use that voice anymore.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of like worries about it. And I guess, yeah, let me ask: do you think people have a fundamental right to their voice? Because I did the little bit of internet googling on the legal aspects of it. It's not clear that people, unless they're famous, they have any sort of right to their voice. It's not something built into any of our laws right now. But do you think that this is something that fundamentally we should feel like we have a right to our particular voice?
I think so. I think we'll come to that. I think we're still finding out and experimenting, and humanity is trying to figure out what this means. Kind of like our discussion. It's a model sitting on a server. Who owns that? I think James Earl Jones signed over the rights to his voice for future Star Wars movies, which was
I didn't know that.
interesting.
That's yeah,
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
yeah.
Darth Vader
Val.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, he's got a cool voice. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
monetize it. Um, and then Val Kilmer. I think he used his neural voice in the last Top Gun.
Oh yeah.
I've had people come up to me. What one early on when I was doing neural voices, he's like, my father was an instructor, and I've got a lot of videos, and I would like you to create my father's voice. He passed, but I want to my children to hear my father's voice, right? So he gave me all the recordings, and I went to create the neural voice, and I was working with Microsoft at the time, and they're like, "Oh, we don't know what to do with this case because you have to give permission. You, the person that owns the voice, have to give permission." I was like, "Well, what about your next of kin?" And they were like, "We haven't had that case before," and it was
Yeah.
interesting. Like, as we experiment, we're going to learn about these things. So yeah, I tell people now, it's like, if you have a chance, record, bank your voice, have the
Yeah.
recordings ready, and then put it in your will. Like, because this is coming, it's fast, it's here. And, pretty soon, if you want to recover that voice and you have the recordings, if you've passed, your children will need that power to recreate that voice.
Oh, that's very interesting. I could
Yeah.
especially, I definitely could see this for authors in the future where they're trying to reconstruct, people's voices. But yeah, I could see it for everyone who wants to like hear letters that or emails that their parents have said and hear it
Yeah.
in the original voice, having that ability to do it. Well, I
Yep.
guess do you think we'll ever get to the point where people don't think of their voice as much as their identity as they do now, where maybe because I mean we're getting to the point where like on Zoom, for example, you can jump on Zoom and you can switch an avatar. You could be a giraffe's head, right? And just for
Yeah.
fun, I don't think that's the best meeting experience in the world, but people do that on Zoom. They switch their appearance. Um, but I can imagine a future where people could switch their, audio experience just as easily. If they want to use a different voice, like they do a different visual avatar, why not? They could speak with a Texas accent, or they could sound like Scarlett Johansson or anyone else in the world. Do you think we'll get to a point where people are doing things like that, or is a voice too fundamental? Is it more fundamental in a sense than a person's appearance?
It's kind of like that inventing identity thing I went through. I think we will eventually get there. I think some people will have different preferences, and some will want to jump from identity to identity. Some won't. Um, and I'm in a way, like some of the examples I have, like that individual with two different voices. I mean, I do it now. I jump different
Yeah.
language. I'm a different person, right? So I think we'll get there. I think we'll get to a point where you can choose different identities much faster than we ever imagined before. Yeah.
Hmm. Huh.
Which is a strange thought,
Yeah,
right? I
no,
mean,
it's hard to get your head around. I mean, these things that we think of as so essential to who we are. Now it's being put under control of technology, where we have so much more, control over how we want to represent ourselves to the world. I guess that's a good
yeah,
thing. It's just it's
yeah.
hard for me to get my mind around what that will be like.
Just yeah, one more thought
Yeah,
is, I hated public speaking before like 3 years ago, but as an MVP, part of the job is to go out, speak, educate people, teach them. And every time I go out for a presentation now, I go into Azure OpenAI Studio, and I type in, this is the audience, this is the bulleted list of the information I want to give. And based on this audience, how do I emotionally connect and tell a great story, right? And it matches me up and lets me make huge impact and make a connection with people. And it's in a way, I'm changing my identity for each. I change my style, my stories for each person. So in a way, I'm experimenting with doing this every single day now. Um, and it's a strange feeling to be able to have that insight into your audience and connect that way.
huh. That's very cool. Well, so I'm wondering if all of that attention, because it seemed like an outsized level of attention to the Scarlett Johansson controversy. I mean, it was in all the
Hmm.
newspapers. People were freaking out about it. Lots of podcasts about that. And I'm wondering if do you think it's revealing something deeper than just this surface level? I mean, at a certain level, who cares? I mean, other than legal issues of Scarlett Johansson, why were people so like engaged with this question?
Um, I think, yeah, that's a great question. Why are people so engaged? And I think there's going to be a lot of, and it's all social constructs and ethics, and everything is open.
Yeah.
This opened up everything. It's like what happens when you can sound like whoever you want to be and just, right now just take their voice and there's no rules around this. Um, what happens? Right. So I think this was one of the first cases. So it was really, really interesting. I think we learned a lot about it. I think, in terms of identity, we trust, I think a lot of it has to do with trust, and the trust and the goodwill you built with your voice, for example. and that you can take that trust and duplicate it that quickly, that easily, I think opens up a lot of discussion and fear about, the deep fake, that fear is somebody can just take my identity and my trust and just move it. Right. Um, so I think those are the things behind the scenes that people are thinking about. Is like, this is a scary thought that identities can be shifted and traded and taken.
So it might be like the first full realization from a bunch of people that you can effectively deepfake someone else's voice. And so
Yeah.
maybe it's not as, I can't prove I'm the person I am anymore by getting on a phone. I mean, I'm thinking of all of the, when I log into my bank, I can use my voice identity to log in. Well, that's out.
Yeah.
That's not going to work anymore if, we have good enough technology there. But that's, a very practical way that people are using their voice to show their identity. But just the idea of this is something unique to me, I think maybe this was the first sort of evidence of that.
Right.
And I mean, I think maybe the other thing that's going on with Scarlett Johansson, it's also just because we have, people have an emotional connection to actresses, right? Actors and actresses, and we feel like we know their personality, and a lot of it's conveyed in their voice. I'm wondering, for a lot of people, this might also be the first exposure to how rich these technologies have become and how close, how human-like they're becoming too. Because I know, like there's been a bunch of articles lately on, this was inevitable, but how OpenAI is passing the Turing test, and it's like if it's not. And you can argue about it. I think it passes the Turing test if people confuse it with an obnoxious teenager. But I mean, there's some caveats to it. But it's getting close. I mean, for a lot of situations, you can't really distinguish between whether you're talking to, a large language model or you're talking to an actual human being. And I wonder if this is starting to make people more aware of how advanced AI is getting, and maybe pay a little more attention to that. Do you think? I mean, do you think that there are aspects of humans that AI will never be able to capture? I mean, is voice, have we got to the point now where we've kind of like decided, okay, we can capture all of a human's identity using AI, using large language models? Or do you think there will always be things that we can use to distinguish what's truly human from what AIs are doing?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're far away from ever replacing humans with AI. I remember my wife invited me to Les Mis, and I was sitting in the audience, and I watched this show, the choreography, the stage, the singing, the perfection, the interactions, all the movements on stage, and I was like, this is a beautiful thing. And this I was like, I just love humanity, and I love what has happened here, how humans can create this beautiful art and sound and this moment, right? And I don't think I would have realized that if I hadn't worked with AI so much and seen that it only does one thing, which is the language part. It does very well, but this show, this creation by humans coming together. And I also think a lot about, I have three kids, three boys, and just, humans, we duplicate ourselves. We have cells. We have this brain with a prefrontal cortex and, the reptile brain. And I was like, all of these things that make a human a human. I was like, I don't see, AI is just a model sitting on a computer. So when I think, working with AI every day has made me come to that realization that I don't think, it will replace or come, anytime soon is what I'm seeing,
So you think maybe this reaction is perhaps overblown? The reaction to Scarlett Johansson, or just the general reactions? I mean, I just came from a conference this morning in Seattle on AI and employment, and the question after question is AI going to replace all of us in our jobs? And this is the main thing. Is like, okay, let's move on to another question. Nope, back to that one again. And people are understandably very nervous about AI replacing humans in a lot of the activities they do right now. So do you think, it sounds like you believe though that there's having your experience with AI, that there's still a very limited scope where AI can replace what humans can do, and so we have some time left where we can be number one on Earth. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
So that's been interesting. I've been reading some books about how we as humans
Yeah.
are saying number one on Earth. But then I read about birds who can see with infrared, right? And then I'm like, ants and bees, they have these
Right.
like massive social structures, and
Right.
there's trillions more ants and bees and trees, that communicate with roots. And then I was like, well,
Yeah.
AI can think, but,
Yeah.
and mimic thoughts, but, other creatures have adapted and created other methods of interacting with the world, right? So
That's
yeah,
fair. Okay. No, a
yeah,
biologist
yeah,
would definitely hit me on the head if I said we were number one. We're well
yeah,
adapted to our particular environment, and trees are just as well adapted to theirs. Sure. Okay. All right.
yeah,
But secretly, I was hoping you were on Team Humans. But okay. But
yeah. No. Well, yeah. But I do find humans fascinating, and I wrote this down in my notes because I think we're the only species that can um, come together in large groups, like
Yeah.
countries, millions of people, and we can delegate tasks
Mm.
and cooperate and send and communicate. And that's why I think large language models are fascinating,
Mm.
because they they mimic our communication that we've created over years and years to like move massive. You have shared values and social constructs that can point humans in the same direction, to accomplish amazing things. And that's where I don't think AI will ever replace it, and then we can be flexible too. Each individual can change who they are in that social structure to create something beautiful, right? So yeah, I am on Team Human in that aspect. It's
Okay.
like I think we have an amazing brain, and
Uh,
it will never replace that part of it. So
Good to know. Good to know. Well, I mean, it sounds like, yeah. So it sounds like one of the things that you think is special about humans is our ability to cooperate. And I think
mm,
what Yuval Harari famously in his book *Sapiens*, he talks a lot about, like this is something distinctive about humans that I forget who said it about you can't throw a bunch of apes onto an airplane and expect them not to, crash the airplane because they just won't
right.
sit quietly but yeah, definitely. We're good at that. We're good at following rules like that. But I mean, I think, but we trying to, I think over time, isn't that something that we're attempting to do though? We're trying to make, at least OpenAI seems to be doing that. They're trying to make their assistants feel more like, humans we're interacting with. I know there's
Mhm.
a bunch of the stuff they're doing on the advanced audio mode is to allow more, human-like conversational modes where you can interrupt, the OpenAI mid-conversation and they have sub-second responses and all that. Do you think there's a danger in making this experience of talking to AI too human-like? Because we get back to the question of, it seems like OpenAI at least is actively trying to make AIs seem like humans, like human assistants, like engaging in, natural human dialogue. Is that a mistake? Because we're going to run into, pretty soon realizations that these aren't humans? Or do you think this is just sort of the natural way that humans want to interact with machines and we're just making it easier for people?
Um, I think we're exploring and they're exploring, and I don't think they know. So I think they're going to push the boundaries, and I
Yeah.
think it's a very human thing to explore and try to know and try to learn and experiment and run into the roadblocks and the mistakes, and then maybe pull back and say, "Ooh,
Yeah.
maybe that was a bad idea," right? So I think we're all in that stage right now, is just experimenting and exploring and learning. And like kind of like the neural voice thing,
Yeah.
I had no idea how the gentleman in Quebec, how they would use it. And as I learned that people wanted to preserve and hear their fathers and ancestors again, I learned that that was something that was needed. Because I hear when I talk about neural voice, a lot of it is like, that's not needed. Nobody asked for this. I was like, yeah, but nobody knew to ask for this.
Right.
And for those people that have lost their voice, they want this. So yeah, I think I think they're experimenting, and we'll see. I guess is,
Okay,
is the
that's
question.
fair. That's fair. Well, so how do you suggest that people listening into this, if they're interested in learning more about your work, what's the best what's the best resource to go to, or do you have a website you recommend? Do you have how do they learn more about the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, I have a Patreon site, but I think just connecting with me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is amazing because it's the most trusted social media platform, and since the professionalism is there, the trust is there too. And so I post there every week and just telling these stories, because it happens so fast now. That's one of the issues is things are happening so fast. These AI models. I remember, when 3.5 came out, people were like, "Oh, this is okay," but when four came out, people were like, "This talks close to a human," like this, and it happens so fast, right?
Right.
So I think finding me on LinkedIn, and I'm just flooding LinkedIn with information as I learn every week, because I'm exploring too, and I learn oodles of new stuff every week, and I try to post it on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. This has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me, Stephen. Yep.
Thank you for joining us for the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity. Please remember to subscribe to ensure that you receive future episodes.